Hello everyone, this is Michael, but you can call me Mike, and today I will be introducing the Watchmen graphic novel as it relates to the theme, the death of the hero. This graphic novel was complex and deep in many ways, and it was really tough to narrow things down. I had a lot of fun thinking about it, and I hope you are able to follow along. I want to start by talking about the monomyth structure. The monomyth is the hero's journey, a journey to the underworld and a return. To start, the hero, often reluctant, is called to adventure to slay the dragon and rescue the princess, or so to speak. It is a call to the unknown. Things happen along the way, and the hero meets figures like mentors or helpers that provide certain kinds of aid, strength-based, knowledge-based, supernatural, or just to give a really good pat on the back. Committed to the quest, the hero has to pass the guardian of the threshold and travel through the underworld where they will face challenges and temptations. The hero overcomes the abyss, comes out transformed, bringing with them newfound strength and insight. The monomyth can then be aptly characterized as a process of individual and psychological transformation. Now, here's the thing. There's no time for any of this in The Watchmen. With the looming threat of total annihilation, our heroes already find themselves in the abyss. Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' The Watchmen attempts to subvert the superhero genre. In other words, it does not follow the typical monomyth pattern and structure. We see this alluded throughout the graphic novel. Most notably, no one is buying Superman comics anymore, because after the appearance of Masked and Caped Crusaders, people realized superheroes simply did not meet up to their promises and expectations. Instead, people realized that superheroes were abusing their power. As it turns out, being a superhero is not all it is cracked up to be. The Watchmen is a deconstruction of the hero, and throughout this presentation, I want you to think about the question, what is a hero, and what does it take to be one? Moving on to plot and setting, the story takes place in an alternate 1980s timeline in America, and reflects the events and anxieties that happen in our world. In this world, vigilantism is legal after the birth of Dr. Manhattan, but in 1977, the Keene Act outlaws it. The only two superheroes permitted to operate are the comedian and Dr. Manhattan, but only under the authority and direction of the government. It's the Cold War, and tensions between the United States and Soviet Union are at an all-time high, each superpower prepared to launch nuclear missiles. However, even with the advent of total annihilation, someone is out in the streets murdering superheroes. The story begins on the streets of New York, where Rorschach is investigating the murder of the comedian. The comedian is Edward Blake's hero name, or in other words, this trickster archetype. In Man and His Symbols, Young describes the trickster as a figure whose physical appetites dominate his behavior. He has the mentality of an infant, lacking any purpose beyond the gratification of his primary needs. He is cruel, cynical, and unfeeling. This basically sums up the comedian. He is amoral, a sadist, and a psychopath. He does the government's dirty work and commits unforgivable acts of cruelty. Here in this panel, he's in Vietnam just sort of doing his thing. He's essentially the Captain America's dark counterpart, where Captain America believes in following the rules, not trading lives, and respecting women. The comedian is the total opposite. But how can this be? How can superheroes behave in such a way and still be called heroes? To answer this question, we can look at Rorschach's characterization of the comedian, where he says he saw the true nature of the 20th century and chose to become a reflection of it, a parody. In other words, it takes a monster to fight a monster. This is Alan Moore's genius at play, subverting the hero concept by showing the psychological implications of such a burden of responsibility and what is really involved in such an undertaking. The trickster archetype not only represents the comedian, but also society as a whole. With this in mind, the comedian is an important character because he sets the tone and theme for the story in which these characters operate in. This theme is nihilism. In simple terms, nihilism is the view that in the grand scheme of things, nothing really matters. The comedian has seen a lot of death and violence, but he's not filled with apathy as one might expect. Instead, he sees his own violent actions as permissible. If life has no meaning, then his actions don't really either, and this seems to reflect society as a whole. Other characters will respond to this idea of nihilism differently. Rorschach is investigating the death of the comedian and realizes that someone is murdering active and retired superheroes. He's the only active superhero apart from the comedian and Dr. Manhattan, but he's operating illegally. When the Keene Act passed, Rorschach did not oblige and instead follows his own brand of exacting justice, taking down criminals and crime syndicates. Rorschach is a psychopath, misanthrope, and misogynist. He sees the world as inherently sinful and dirty. When he's exacting justice, he is unmerciful, brutal, and violent. Rorschach experienced childhood trauma. He witnessed his mother prostitute herself, but she also abused him. He becomes a vigilante with the death of Kitty Genevieve, where many witnesses reported the crime, but no one stepped in to prevent it. However, Rorschach's real name is Walter Kovacs, and he claims he did not become Rorschach until an investigation led him to the death of a little girl. He handcuffed the murderer to a chair, started a fire, and left him a hacksaw so that his only way out would be to cut his own hand off. Rorschach embodies nihilism because in a seemingly godless society and without objective morality, he's able to create his own brand of good and evil. But he sees morality as kind of ambiguous and draws a clear line between what is good and what is evil. This is sort of expressed in this panel here, where you can kind of see him talk about the dress and say there's no gray areas. However, his interest is not saving lives, but punishing evil. As he puts it, evil must be punished, but I shall not compromise on this. Dr. Manhattan is the only character with superhuman powers and can effortlessly shape the world around him. He can manipulate matter, teleport. He has walked on the surface of the sun. He can change the size of his body to that of a giant. And he can see past, present, and future all at once. He won the Vietnam War by himself. However, as amazing as all of this sounds, it is incredibly difficult for Dr. Manhattan to relate to human beings. He no longer has empathy. Throughout the comic, we see this played out with Manhattan most of the time feeling conflicted. He wants to care about humanity, but he can't think of any reason why he should. The comedian killed a woman pregnant with his child, and Manhattan seemingly shocked. But the comedian tells Manhattan he could have turned that bullet into anything he wanted and prevented it, but he chose not to. On a smaller scale, Manhattan's girlfriend is completely unhappy. She's in a relationship that makes her feel all alone. And it doesn't help that Manhattan is just really bad at sex. Manhattan's humanity was lost in this transformation from John Osterman. But this also doesn't mean he's violent in the same way the comedian is, but rather he's simply indifferent to all of it. He's simply indifferent to all in the same way we might be indifferent to an ant on the sidewalk. This is the way in which Manhattan embodies nihilism. He simply cannot see the inherent meaning in human life as much as he wants to. Ozymandias, or Adrian Veidt, is considered to be the world's smartest man. He's incredibly ambitious, rich, and intelligent, but also incredibly arrogant. He wants to be like Alexander the Great and the Egyptian pharaohs. Essentially, he sees himself as a godlike figure and wants to leave a legacy behind. So, how does he do this? Well, with the looming threat of nuclear warfare, Ozymandias takes it upon himself to solve the crisis. He purchases an island, hires scientists, and they create a giant psychic squid. He teleports the squid to New York, where it explodes, killing 3 million people. This ends the Cold War, because US and Soviet Union unite together against a common enemy, that is, aliens from outer space. Or at least, that's the way Ozymandias wanted it to look. As ridiculous as this plan sounds, it works, and the Earth is saved from total annihilation. For this plan to succeed, he needed Dr. Manhattan out of the way, so he created a hoax that Dr. Manhattan causes cancer because of the sort of radiation that he emanates. With all the media attention, Dr. Manhattan couldn't take it anymore, and he fled to Mars, where he starts to think about whether or not humanity is worth saving. Now, Ozymandias is also behind the comedian's death. He kills him when he finds out that the comedian was onto this plan because he stumbled upon this island of his by accident. But is it really right to kill 3 million people if it means preventing humanity's extinction? According to Ozymandias, it is, because being a hero means making the decision that no one else can. Interestingly, Ozymandias is like the archetype of Jesus Christ. He has taken the world's sin and placed it on himself. Burdening the responsibility, he sees himself as achieving something worthy of a king, similar to Alexander the Great, even if no one will ever know about his achievement. The question is he a hero, a villain, or just some kind of nutcase or egomaniac? I want to return back to the monomyth structure because it tells us that heroes undergo a transformation as the pivotal point of overcoming the abyssal stage. To me, none of the characters seem to do this except for Dr. Manhattan. He teleports his ex-girlfriend Lori to Mars to ask her to convince him to save humanity. For the most part, Dr. Manhattan is unpersuaded by Lori until Lori comes to the realization that the comedian who raped her mother is actually her father. The juxtaposition here is fascinating. On this realization, Lori suddenly feels like life is meaningless, whereas Dr. Manhattan suddenly sees value in human life. However, this transformation or insight is kind of underwhelming and possibly incomprehensible. He seems to go through the motions of the hero's journey, but it doesn't have any substance. His insight is that the world is a miracle, that out of all the possibilities, Lori exists, and not only that, but exists in the particular way that she does. He masks this insight using thermodynamics, but once you peel back the science, you realize this doesn't carry any emotional weight. If you know Richard Dawkins, you might be familiar with this speech. We are going to die, and that makes us the lucky ones. Most people are never going to die because they are never going to be born. The potential people who could have been here in my place, but who will in fact never see the light of day, outnumber the sand grains of Arabia. Certainly, those unborn ghosts include greater poets than Keats, scientists greater than Newton. We know this because the set of possible people allowed by our DNA so massively exceeds the set of actual people. In the teeth of these stupefying odds, it is you and I in our ordinariness that are here. We privileged few who won the lottery of birth against all odds. How dare we whine at our inevitable return to that prior state from which the vast majority have never stirred? Now, this speech really reminds me of what Dr. Manhattan says. However, it's not, if it wasn't eye-opening when Richard Dawkins says it, it's certainly not opening when Dr. Manhattan says it. So I just wanted to point this out because it just doesn't carry any kind of emotional weight, and the insight that Dr. Manhattan achieves just feels really underwhelming. But I'll let you decide. However, by the time Dr. Manhattan gets back, Ozymandias' plan has already happened. What can the heroes really do about this now? If they tell the world what really happened, they risk nuclear warfare, and the lives lost would have been for nothing. At this point, killing Ozymandias really would not do anything. However, Rorschach is uncompromising. If you remember, evil must always be punished. He believes the world should know the truth, but Manhattan kills him. Peace on Earth is achieved, but at what cost? I want to leave this open-ended and return to the question, what is a hero? What does a hero's death mean? Did Rorschach die pointlessly, and can we even think of him as a hero? So, I have some concluding thoughts about this that I'd like to share, and I want to make really one final proposal. The monomyth structure requires a real force they're fighting, and the Watchmen undermines this because the forces are invented by the people and their projections. For instance, the US will not disarm their nuclear warheads in the fear that the Soviets will take advantage and fire, and vice versa. People and nations are creating their villain through a kind of projection, and I want to propose that what if the villain is just this collective shadow? Ozymandias picks up on this and realizes that putting on a mask and fighting crime syndicates is only taking care of the symptoms, but not the disease. Rorschach's mask symbolizes this idea of the collective shadow. His mask is based on the Rorschach test, where a subject is asked to share what they see when looking at a blotted image. The idea being, Our perceptions are projected. Rorschach wants criminals to look at his mask so they can see their fears projected. It is a form of psychological torture. All this fear-mongering and panic makes the collective shadow the villain, but it's not really something you can directly point at. In turn, this makes it hard to get past our nihilistic ways of thinking and to really see the value in the world and in other people.